There's a sound no one in the neighborhood ever forgot. The thud of a shovel striking dirt. Late at night, coming from the basement of an ordinary house, on an ordinary street, in the suburbs of Chicago. No one imagined what that sound meant. Because the man digging had an easy smile, a clown costume tucked away in his closet, and a spotless reputation in the community. He threw parties. He gave to charity. He shook the mayor's hand. And all the while, beneath his feet, the ground was keeping a secret that would become one of the most gruesome in American history. This is the trail of destruction left by John Wayne Gacy, the man the world would come to know as the Killer Clown. By the end, 33 bodies would be pulled from that property. 5 of them, to this day, remain unnamed. Welcome to Concealed File. John Wayne Gacy was born on March 17, 1942, in Chicago, the second child of Irish immigrants. The family was devoutly Catholic, middle class. At school, no one had a bad word to say about him. He was in the Boy Scouts, worked part-time jobs from an early age. The deeper problem lay elsewhere, his relationship with his father, an alcoholic, abusive man who never approved of anything his son did. John spent his entire childhood chasing an approval that never came. After moving through several schools, he earned a business degree and landed a job at a major company. He was sent to manage a store in Springfield, Illinois. There, for the first time, he found a sense of importance and threw himself into work to the point of burnout. In 1964, he got married, had children, started businesses, and built a reputation through volunteer work with an organization called the JCs. The perfect picture of the American family. Behind the facade, rumors circulated. In 1968, he was formally charged with sodomizing a teenage boy. In court, he claimed it had all been consensual. The court ordered a psychiatric evaluation. The result, antisocial personality disorder. Sentenced to 10 years, he was paroled after 18 months for good behavior. His marriage fell apart. The comfortable life he'd built vanished. Back in Chicago, he bought a house on West Somerdale Avenue. He remarried. He made friends with the neighbors. No one knew about his past. In 1974, he started his own contracting company, PDM, hiring almost exclusively teenagers desperate for work. When asked about it, he said young labor was cheaper. In 1975, he became treasurer of the local Democratic Party and created a clown persona, Pogo, to entertain children at parties and hospitals. On May 6, 1978, he was photographed alongside First Lady Rosalynn Carter. At that exact moment, there were bodies buried beneath the floor of his house. No one, anywhere, suspected a thing. On July 31, 1975, Johnny Butkovich, 17, went to his boss's house to collect wages he hadn't been paid. He worked at PDM and was known around the neighborhood for his 1968 Dodge, a point of personal pride. The conversation turned heated. Johnny threatened to report him for tax evasion. Gacy, furious, promised to settle things. Johnny left with 2 friends. He dropped them off at home. And after that, no one would ever see him again. His Dodge was found abandoned. Keys in the ignition, belongings untouched on the seat. As if the owner had simply vanished into thin air. Johnny's father pointed to a name without hesitation. John Wayne Gacy. Questioned, Gacy was convincing. His friends backed up his story. The case was filed away as just another runaway. The Butkovich family would call the police more than 100 times over the next 3 years. No one listened. In the months that followed, a pattern was quietly forming in the Chicago Police Department's records. In June 1976, Michael Bonin, 17, disappeared. After him, Darrell Sampson, Randall Reffitt, Samuel Stapleton, William Carroll. Boys who looked alike. From the same kind of life. Surrounded by the same kind of silence. No one connected the dots. Gregory Godzik, 17, was thrilled with his new job at PDM. So thrilled that he didn't mind helping his boss with extra tasks after hours. Digging holes, mostly. Always for drainage work at Gacy's house. On the night of December 12, 1976, after dropping off his girlfriend, he disappeared. His car was found parked discreetly in the village of Niles. His family went to Gacy. He said Gregory had left a voicemail saying he was running away. When they asked to hear the message, Gacy claimed he'd already deleted it. In the months that followed, John Syzc, 19, and Robert Gilroy, 18, the son of a Chicago police sergeant, vanished without a trace. The search for Robert was massive. Nothing was found. The whole city was losing its young men, and no one seemed to notice. In the first week of January 1978, authorities knocked on Gacy's door, not over a disappearance, but a sexual assault accusation. Robert Donnelly, 19, reported he'd been abducted at gunpoint from a bus stop. Taken to his attacker's home, he was assaulted, tortured, and held underwater in a bathtub over and over. As he suffered, he could hear his attacker mocking him. Robert would later say the pain got so bad that all he could do was beg Gacy to just kill him and get it over with. He was released with a warning. No one would believe him. And, tragically, Gacy was right. To police, Gacy described the whole episode as consensual. The police accepted his version. Just another disagreement between men. Case closed. In July of that same year, Jeffrey Rignall, 26, showed up at his girlfriend's door covered in bruises. He'd been drugged with chloroform, tied to a concrete post inside Gacy's house, and tortured for hours before being dumped, unconscious, in Lincoln Park. Police didn't have enough leads, so Jeffrey did something no one expected. He went out with friends and retraced the streets he could vaguely remember, and they found the car. The same car. It led them straight to John Wayne Gacy's front door. Gacy answered the charges out on bail. Timothy O'Rourke, 20, told a friend he'd landed a job with a Chicago contractor. He disappeared soon after. Frank Landingen, 19, was last seen walking down Foster Avenue. 12 days later, James Matsura, 20, also vanished, not before telling his mother about a great new job at a contracting company. The pattern kept repeating, and the pace of the killings only quickened as the police closed in. Everything seemed lost, until one case, in particular, would change everything. Monday, December 11th, 1978. A freezing day in Des Plaines, a Chicago suburb. Robert Piest, 15, worked at Nissan Pharmacy. That night, his mother dropped him off at work, same as always. Before they left the house, she'd shown him the cake she'd bought for her own 46th birthday. The party would start as soon as Robert got home from work at 9 o'clock. During his shift, a regular customer came into the store, John Wayne Gacy. The two got to talking about business. Gacy mentioned, casually, that he paid his employees $400 a week. Robert listened, and he remembered it. At 5 to 9, his mother arrived to pick him up. He said he still had a few things to sort out. He mentioned a contractor wanted to talk to him about a job. "I'll be right back," he said. It was the last thing his family would ever hear him say. When Elizabeth Piest came back to get her son, she searched every corner outside the pharmacy. No sign of him. Lieutenant Joseph Kozenzak began investigating. He soon uncovered something troubling in the files. Gacy had been convicted of sodomy years earlier and had been on parole since 1970. It was the first visible thread of a much bigger web. When officers went to the house on West Summerdale Avenue, Gacy confirmed he'd been at the pharmacy, but denied any contact with the staff. Called in for questioning, he showed up at 3 in the morning, claiming his car had gotten stuck in the mud. His coat and boots were caked in dirt. He was released. The next day, a search warrant was issued. Inside the house, officers found a jewelry box hiding a driver's license, several rings, men's clothing too small for an adult, handcuffs, fake police badges, pornographic films, and a simple receipt from Nissan Pharmacy, made out to a co-worker of Robert's, lying next to a length of nylon rope. Later that day, a strange smell led officers to a trapdoor. Beneath it, dirt mixed with lime. Without enough concrete evidence at that moment, the investigation was called off. Gacy was released, under round-the-clock surveillance. What followed was a genuine Cold War between one man and the police closing in around him. At first, Gacy tried to play it off with forced humor, offering the agents watching him coffee and snacks. But little by little, his mask began to crack. Sudden bursts of speed through the streets, desperate attempts to shake his tail. On the night of December 20th, 1978, pushed past his limit, Gacy went to the office of his lawyer, Sam Amarant. Anxious, he started drinking without stopping. Then he pointed to a newspaper article on the desk about Robert Piest's disappearance. "The kid is dead. In a river." And he kept going. Over the following hours, he confessed to killing at least 30 people. Most of them, he said, buried in his own basement. When asked who they were, he described them only as hustlers, dealers, and liars. Drunk, he eventually passed out on the couch. Early the next morning, he was arrested, initially on drug possession charges. A second search warrant was requested for his home. The medical examiner was called to the scene. During the search, an officer flushed a toilet and caught the unmistakable smell rising up through the pipes. Decomposition, coming from the exact direction of that lime-covered trapdoor. Under medical supervision, the ground was carefully excavated, and the first bodies came to the surface. Faced with the discovery, Gacy confessed to everything. He described his method with a coldness that left investigators speechless. He'd win the trust of young men with promises of money and work. Partway through the conversation, he'd suggest a magic trick, cuffing the victim's hands. Then the violence would begin. He'd handcuff his victims, sexually assault them, stuff socks or underwear down their throats, and slowly strangle them with a rope twisted tight around a hammer handle. Death, often, took more than 2 hours to come. In some cases, he kept the body beside his own bed for up to a full day before burying it. Some victims were carried to the garage, where he embalmed them himself before the final burial. By his last murders, that ritual care was gone entirely, just immediate disposal. That explained why so many bodies were found practically stacked on top of one another. Killed on the same day, buried in the same space, simply for lack of room. 3 days after Christmas 1978, 27 bodies were pulled from that property, turning that year's holiday season into something deeply dark for the whole nation, which watched it all unfold on television. Frank Landingen's body was found in the Des Plaines River. That same day, so was James Matsaris. The autopsy revealed he'd suffocated on his own underwear, stuffed down his throat. Robert Pius' body wouldn't be found until April, trapped for months in a dam on the Illinois River, suffocated by a wad of towels forced down his throat. The house was demolished, but the damage was already done. There's one scene investigators pieced together from witness statements, one that sums up exactly what Gacy was, underneath it all. One afternoon in Chicago, a funeral home worker arrived to collect the body of a victim who had died during one of Gacy's visits. When he got there, he found Gacy still sitting calmly in a chair in the living room, drinking coffee. The man looked at the worker, pointed at the body like he was pointing out a package ready for pickup, and said, "He's right there. You can take him," and went back to his coffee. The trial began on February 6, 1980, in Cook County. More than 100 witnesses were heard over 5 weeks. The defense insisted the crimes had been irrational and impulsive. If Gacy were found insane, he'd escape the death penalty and go to a psychiatric hospital instead. The prosecution argued the opposite. A cold manipulator who premeditated every step of his crimes, who built trust, created rituals, eliminated evidence, who chose his victims carefully and got rid of any possible witness. Jeffrey Rignall, one of the survivors, was called to testify. Reliving the details of what he'd suffered in that house, he began vomiting in front of the jury, overtaken by his own trauma. Gacy showed no reaction at all. The defense brought in Gacy's mother and sister to testify about the abuse he'd suffered as a child. Neighbors praised his character. Experts offered conflicting diagnoses: schizophrenia, multiple personality disorder, antisocial personality disorder. But the jury wasn't convinced. John Wayne Gacy was convicted on 33 counts of murder. The sentence, death. On death row, Gacy gave numerous interviews over the years. He tried to suggest he'd had accomplices, a claim that never held up. He never showed remorse. He never helped authorities identify the victims who still had no names. On the day of his execution, he had one last picnic with his family in the prison yard. Fried chicken, shrimp, fries, fresh strawberries. His last words were a crude insult. His death was confirmed at 12:58 a.m. on May 10, 1994. But the case didn't end with him. In 2011, Sergeant Jason Moran uncovered something disturbing. 8 of Gacy's victims had never been identified. A new investigation began. New DNA testing was ordered. The public was asked to help through a form on the police department's website. That same week, hundreds of people called in, willing to give their own DNA. One of them was the sister of William Bundy, 19, missing since 1976. He'd gone out to a party one Friday in October and never came home. At the time, Police wrote it off as just another teenage runaway. 33 years later, a childhood friend came forward with a new detail shortly before he vanished. William had mentioned working for a regional contractor and had turned up with an unexpected amount of cash. The friend also remembered seeing him, on the day he disappeared, inside a black Oldsmobile. The sisters' DNA confirmed it all. William Bundy officially became one more named victim. In 2017, the family of James Hawkinson, 16, went to the police. James had disappeared in August 1976 after leaving home for Chicago. The investigation revealed that James had applied for a Social Security number in the 1970s, used to record a single, curious paycheck, $102. A paycheck issued by John Wayne Gacy. In 2021, the Sheriff's Department partnered with the DNA Doe Project, an organization specializing in identifying remains through genetic comparison. The process led to the identification of Francis Alexander, 21, missing since 1976, a young man his own family had believed simply walked away from everyone. To this day, 5 victims remain unnamed. Cook County authorities still hold out hope that one day, every one of them will finally be identified. 33 bodies. Decades of impunity. A man who threw parties, wore a clown costume, and shook hands with politicians while digging, at night, into the ground beneath his own house. What sets John Wayne Gacy's case apart from almost every other is not the number of victims. It's the fact that there were warnings. There were named suspects. There were families who called the police more than 100 times. And the system's response was, "It's nothing. Get back to work." The question that lingers isn't about Gacy. He was caught, tried, and executed. The question is about what allows crimes like this to go on for so long. About the families who knocked on the right door and were ignored. About the systems that failed again and again and keep failing. Leave your thoughts in the comments. If this story stuck with you, hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell, because every week there's a real story waiting to be told. Stories that stayed hidden. Stories that need to be heard. The next one might be exactly the one you never knew you needed to know. File closed. For now, concealed file, where the truth always surfaces.